In June of 1899, the exact same year Red Dead Redemption 2 is set, a real gang blew up a bridge, blew open a train, and blew the safe so hard that money went flying across the Wyoming prairie. And the most powerful private army in America, bigger than the entire U.S. military, couldn't catch them. The leader of that gang wasn't some cold-blooded killer. He was charming, philosophical, and completely convinced that he and his crew represented something the new industrialized world was trying to erase. Sound like anyone you know? This isn't just a cowboy game. This is documented American history. And by the end of this video, you're going to know the real story, the one Rockstar buried inside their masterpiece. And I promise you, once you know it, you will never look at this game the same way again. Let's go. Alright, so first things first. Let me be really clear about what we're actually dealing with here, because I think most people miss this completely. Red Dead Redemption 2 is set in 1899, and that is not a random year Rockstar just picked out of a hat. 1899 was the absolute tipping point, the last year the Wild West was still, technically, the Wild West. And here's the thing. The U.S. Census Bureau had officially declared the American frontier closed in 1890. 9 years before the game starts, the frontier was gone. And everybody alive in 1899 could feel it. The old world was dying in real time, and the new world replacing it was, well, we'll get to that. So here's the world the game is set inside. Historians call this period the Gilded Age. Mark Twain actually coined that term, and he meant it as an insult. Gilded means covered in a thin layer of gold on the outside, while something much uglier is hiding underneath. And the Gilded Age was exactly that. You had this tiny group of insanely wealthy industrialists, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt, basically buying up everything. The railroads, the oil, the banks, the steel mills. One man, J.P. Morgan, just a private banker, was so wealthy that the U.S. federal government called him for a bailout. Not once, twice. A private citizen bailed out the United States government, twice. That's the world Arthur Morgan is riding around in. Now, against that backdrop, let me introduce you to the specific gang that inspired everything in this game. They were called the Wild Bunch, also known as the Hole-in-the-Wall Gang, led by a man named Robert Leroy Parker. You probably know him by his alias. And before I tell you anything else about what he did, I need you to understand who he was, because it changes everything about how you understand Dutch Van der Linde. Butch Cassidy was, by nearly every historical account, genuinely likable. People who met him described him as funny and warm and quick to laugh. He reportedly told people, "I have never killed anybody in my life." And, mostly, the historical record backs that up. The real violence in the Wild Bunch came from a guy named Harvey Logan, also known as Kid Curry, who was a genuinely dangerous and unpredictable man with about 9 confirmed kills to his name. Cassidy was the brain, the one with the philosophy, the man who convinced everybody that what they were doing had a point. Does that remind you of anyone sitting around a campfire somewhere? Robert Leroy Parker was born April 13, 1866, in Beaver, Utah, the oldest of 13 children in a Mormon homesteading family. His parents, Maximilian and Annie Parker, were English immigrants who had come west on faith and sheer hard work. By all accounts, young Robert was a cheerful, energetic kid who was great with horses practically from the time he could walk, which, on a frontier ranch, was worth more than almost any other skill. Around 13, working cattle ranches across Utah and Colorado, he fell in with a small-time rustler named Micah Cassidy. Now, Micah Cassidy was one of those guys, charming rogue, good teacher, genuinely bad influence. He taught the kid to shoot, handle cattle, and, well, steal them. And when Robert eventually went outlaw, he took Cassidy as his alias as a tribute to this man who had shaped him. The butch part? That came later, from a brief stint working at a butcher shop in Rock Springs, Wyoming. He was, genuinely, for a while, a butcher. The most famous outlaw in American history used to cut meat for a living. At around 24, Cassidy wound up in the Wyoming State Penitentiary, 18 months for receiving stolen horses, a charge he disputed, by the way. He maintained to the day he died that he'd bought those horses legitimately and someone had set him up. Whether that's true, we don't know. What we know is that he served the 18 months, came out, and made a choice. He was going to live outside the law. He'd already half been there, but he was going to do it on his own terms. No unnecessary killing, no cruelty to people who didn't deserve it, a code. And that code, that specific combination of outlaw life with a personal philosophy of minimal harm, is the exact DNA of Dutch Van der Linde's gang. By his late 20s, Cassidy had assembled the loose confederation of outlaws that history knows as the Wild Bunch. The membership rotated, people came and went, but there were constants. Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, quiet, serious, from Pennsylvania of all places, and by most accounts genuinely the best pistol shot in the outfit. Not a talker, not a philosopher, just devastatingly effective. Harvey Logan, Kid Curry, the dangerous one. The one Cassidy couldn't always control. The one who made the gang genuinely feared rather than just admired. LZ Lay, probably Cassidy's closest friend, the intellectual of the group, the one who understood the larger picture. And a rotating cast of others. Together, they found a hideout so perfect it was almost mythological. The Hole in the Wall, a narrow pass in the Bighorn Mountains of Wyoming, leading to an enormous hidden canyon valley, miles of open land with water, grass, and game, completely enclosed by vertical canyon walls. The only entrance was that gap in the red sandstone cliff. One man with a rifle at that gap could hold off a posse of 50. 2 men could hold it indefinitely. Law enforcement knew exactly where the Wild Bunch was hiding. They essentially could not do anything about it. And this is the template for every gang camp in Red Dead Redemption 2. The hideout with one defensible entrance, the feeling of a world within a world that the outside can't touch. Rockstar didn't invent that, they researched it. Okay, let's talk about the actual robberies, because I want you to understand the scale of what this gang pulled off. Because when you lay it all out together, it is genuinely kind of staggering. June 2nd, 1899, the Wilcox train robbery. This is the big one. They stopped the Union Pacific Overland Express just after midnight, just a man on the tracks waving a red lantern. Simple. When the conductor resists, they detonate dynamite on the bridge behind the train to cut off any possibility of pursuit. Smart. Then they blow the express car door. Then they blow the safe. And this is the part I love. The explosion was so powerful it shattered every single window in the express car and temporarily deafened the messenger inside the car. Money went flying across the Wyoming prairie. The New York Herald covered it. It went national. And the take? Somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. Historians still debate the exact number, because the railroad wasn't exactly eager to advertise how badly they'd just been robbed. That robbery went national, and it activated something that would change everything for the Wild Bunch. The Union Pacific Railroad brought in the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, and we are going to do an entire episode on the Pinkertons, because their real story is genuinely wild. But just so you understand who we're talking about, at the height of their power, the Pinkerton Agency had more armed agents than the entire United States Army. Not government agents, private employees, accountable to corporations, not to the law. And they now had one primary objective: find the Wild Bunch and end them. But, and I want to really emphasize this, the Pinkerton pressure did not slow them down. Not yet. August 29, 1900, Tipton, Wyoming. Another Union Pacific Express train. Same basic playbook. Stop the train, blow the express car, clean out the safe. Estimated take, around $55,000. The railroad is now furious. September 19th, 1900, Winnemucca, Nevada. This time, they go after the First National Bank. 3 members walked into the bank during banking hours, in broad daylight, and walked out with approximately $32,640 in gold coins. Just walked out, with actual gold coins. In the middle of the day, nobody seriously hurt. They vanished into the Nevada desert. And then, July 3, 1901, the Great Northern Railway near Wagner, Montana, one of their last major operations on American soil, somewhere between $40,000 and $65,000. Running total, somewhere around $200,000, roughly $3 million in today's money, and not one conviction. And then, they made a mistake. And it's such a specific kind of mistake that it almost has to be deliberate. The kind only very confident people make. In November 1900, after the Winnemucca bank job, flush with cash, the Pinkerton heat temporarily behind them, 5 members of the gang traveled to Fort Worth, Texas for some downtime. They were in a good mood. They bought new suits, 3-piece suits, bowler hats, the whole deal. And then, and I want you to really absorb this, they walked into a professional photographer's studio, a man named John Swartz, and they had their portrait taken, a formal group portrait, like businessmen, like respectable members of society, while the most powerful private detective agency in American history was actively hunting them. They went and had their photograph taken. The photograph found its way to the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Exactly how, through what chain of hands, remains somewhat murky historically. But once the Pinkertons had it, they had it reproduced and distributed as wanted posters across the entire country. For the first time, every sheriff, every railroad detective, every city police department in America had a professional studio portrait, sharp, clear, unambiguous, of the 5 most wanted outlaws in the country. It is, without any exaggeration, the first viral law enforcement image in American history, and the gang had provided it themselves, voluntarily, in new suits. After that photograph, the heat became something they could no longer manage. Cassidy actually reached out, through intermediaries, to the Union Pacific Railroad, attempting to negotiate an amnesty deal. Stop robbing your trains, you don't prosecute. The railroad's general manager initially seemed receptive. There were apparently actual discussions. Then the deal collapsed. The Pinkertons' involvement, and probably the railroad attorneys, killed it. No legal exit. The walls closing in from every direction. And Cassidy made a decision that feels, I cannot help noticing this, exactly like Dutch Van der Linde logic. If this world won't make room for us, we'll find another frontier. We'll go somewhere the world hasn't reached yet. They chose South America. February 1901. Butch Cassidy, Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, and Longabaugh's companion Etta Place sailed from New York to Buenos Aires aboard a ship called the Herminius. They arrived in Argentina in March and eventually settled in the Cholila Valley of Chubut Province in Patagonia, one of the most isolated places in the entire Western Hemisphere. The Andes rising to the west, open steppes stretching east forever, almost no other settlers for miles in any direction. And here is the part of this story that genuinely gets me every time. They tried to go straight. Like, actually tried. They filed homestead papers under assumed names, bought land and cattle, built a house with an actual parlor and, this detail kills me, a collection of English books. Neighbors described them as quiet, generous, well-liked. Cassidy reportedly threw social gatherings at the ranch. By multiple accounts, they were considered good neighbors in a community of international settlers. And for maybe 2 or 3 years, this was actually working. They were actually doing it, a normal life. Then, in 1903, an Argentine provincial police inspector tracked them down using financial records and shipping manifests, reportedly with intelligence support from the Pinkerton Agency, who had been working international channels. The Argentine police were alerted, and the old pattern began again. Between 1905 and 1908, they returned to robbery, banks and mining company payrolls in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. The Pinkerton Agency maintained active files on their South American activities and coordinated with local law enforcement across 3 countries. And then, on November 4th, 1908, Bolivian police records document 2 American bandits being cornered in a boarding house in San Vicente, Bolivia, after robbing a mining company payroll courier. The firefight lasted through the night. By morning, both men were dead, apparently from gunshot wounds. Evidence at the scene suggested they may have shot each other rather than surrendered to capture. The Bolivians identified the bodies as 2 Americans using aliases, Enrique Brown and Frank Boyd, almost certainly Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But the identification was never formally confirmed. There was no DNA. There was no definitive record. And here is where the story refuses to be neat. Because for decades after that November night in Bolivia, credible witnesses kept coming forward, claiming they had encountered Butch Cassidy alive. His own sister, Lula Parker Bettinson, claimed he visited the family farm in Circleville, Utah in the early 1920s and told them he had survived. She was specific about details. She was considered a reliable person. A man named William Phillips, who died in Spokane, Washington in 1937, left behind personal effects, photographs, and an autobiographical manuscript with details about the Wild Bunch that were so specific, so accurate, and so inside that serious historians have argued he may have been Robert Leroy Parker, alive, and living under a new name for 3 decades after his supposed death in Bolivia. Nobody knows for certain. The official record says, died, San Vicente, November 1908. But that record has never been proven beyond question. And that ambiguity, that open, unresolved ending for a man who spent his entire life refusing to be cornered, feels exactly right, doesn't it? It feels like the ending Dutch Van der Linde was always chasing and never quite reached. The exit no one could quite close the book on. The man who wouldn't be pinned down. Not by a posse, not by the Pinkertons, not by 2 countries' worth of law enforcement, and maybe not even by death itself. Whether he died in Bolivia in 1908 or lived quietly in Spokane until 1937, either way, he found his way out. Either through a last stand on his own terms, or through the longest, most improbable disappearing act in American frontier history. So let me connect all of this directly to the game, because the parallels between the Wild Bunch and the Van der Linde gang are not accidental, and they are not superficial. Rockstar spent years researching the historical context of 1899 America, and the fingerprints of the Wild Bunch are all over the design of Dutch's gang. The charismatic leader who genuinely believes in something, Cassidy. The philosophy about civilization and what it's taking from people, Cassidy. The gang's inability to adapt when the world changes around them, Cassidy. The doomed romanticism of men who know on some level that their time is ending but cannot bring themselves to stop, Cassidy. And Kid Curry, violent, unpredictable, loyal to nobody in particular, ultimately a liability who destroys the thing he's part of? That's Micah Bell, right there, historically documented. And here's the historical layer that makes Dutch Van der Linde's speeches actually make sense rather than just sounding like villain monologuing. In 1890, the U.S. Census Bureau officially declared the American frontier closed. For the first time in over 200 years of American history, There was no more unsettled land to push into. The line between civilization and wilderness, the line that had defined the American identity for generations, was gone. And then, in 1893, a historian named Frederick Jackson Turner gave a now famous speech arguing that the frontier was what had made Americans free, individualistic, and democratic. And now it was gone, and nobody knew what America would be without it. The open land was being bought, fenced, incorporated. The railroads were closing off the last free spaces, and a certain kind of person, like Cassidy, like Dutch, could feel it happening in real time. Dutch isn't crazy. He's not randomly philosophical. He is historically accurate. Dutch Van der Linde's problem, his actual, specific, historically grounded problem, is that he's right about what is being lost and wrong about what should replace it. The world replacing the Old West was built on exploitation, on crushed workers, on stolen native land, on bought politicians, on private armies. The robber barons who owned the railroads, Arthur Robbs, had received that railroad land from the government for free and then used it to become richer than nations. The Pinkertons chasing the gang were a private military hired by corporations. Dutch sees all of that clearly. He's not inventing grievances. But his solution, keep riding, keep shooting, find another mountain, is no solution at all. And Rockstar understood that completely. That's why Arthur Morgan is the moral center of the game, not Dutch. Arthur can see what Dutch cannot. The world must change, even if it costs everything. All right, let me quickly run through some of the specific historical figures who map directly to characters in the game, because once you see these, you cannot unsee them. Harvey Logan, Kid Curry, is the clearest real-world template for Micah Bell, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Logan was violent, genuinely unpredictable, and loyalty for him was more of a temporary arrangement than a moral commitment. Historical record shows he killed at least 9 people, escaped from custody twice, including a dramatic escape from a Knoxville, Tennessee jail in 1903 after being actually captured, and died in a Colorado shootout in June 1904 after a train robbery went wrong. No philosophy, no code, just violence in the service of himself. Sound familiar? Elsie Lay is the one that really gets me. The intellectual of the Wild Bunch, Cassidy's closest and most trusted friend, the one who understood the larger picture without losing himself in ideology. Capable, thoughtful, personally loyal even when the situation got complicated. He was eventually captured in New Mexico after a botched train robbery and sentenced to life in prison. But he was paroled after just a few years for his exceptional behavior and for his genuine help during a prison uprising that saved lives. And here's the part. He actually went straight afterward, got legitimate work in water irrigation engineering in Wyoming, built a real life, died in Los Angeles in 1934 at age 66. He got the redemption arc. He got the ending Arthur Morgan deserved and didn't quite reach. And then there's Etta Place, the Sundance Kid's companion who sailed with them to South America, and she is one of the most genuinely mysterious figures in this entire story. Nobody knows her real name. Historians have debated it for over a century. Some accounts say she was a school teacher from Texas or Denver. Some accounts suggest she may have had a rather more complicated background that people of the era were reluctant to document explicitly. She was described by contemporaries as attractive, well-dressed, refined, and apparently very comfortable in social situations that most women of the era would not have encountered. She disappeared from the historical record around 1906 or 1907, before the final Bolivian confrontation, and she was never found. Her real identity is officially unknown to this day. She just walked out of history, and nobody could follow. Okay, pause. I genuinely want to know this. Before you watched this video, when you were riding around in Red Dead Redemption 2, robbing trains, sitting at campfires, listening to Dutch's speeches, did you know any of this was real? Like, did the game ever feel like more than just a story? Because I have this theory that more people learned real American history from Red Dead Redemption 2 than from 12 years of school. And I want to know if that's actually true. Drop it in the comments. Tell me what you already knew, or what surprised you the most. And if one specific thing in this video made you say, "Wait, what?" I really want to know what that moment was. Here's the thing that hits hardest when you really sit with this history. The Wild Bunch weren't cartoon villains. They weren't mindless criminals. They were products of a specific, documented historical moment. A moment when the world was changing faster than most human beings could emotionally process. The ranges they had grown up riding freely were being fenced off by barbed wire. The railroads they robbed had received their land and their right-of-way from the federal government for free, given it as a gift, and had then used that government-granted power to crush independent ranchers and farmers who stood in the way. The Pinkertons hunting them were a private military answerable to corporations, not to law. The men at the very top, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, controlled more wealth than most nations on Earth. And a certain kind of person looked at all of that and said, "I will not participate. I will not be absorbed. I will not comply." Butch Cassidy wasn't just an outlaw. He was a man who had grown up in the last open spaces of a continent and watched those spaces get measured, bought, fenced, and incorporated, and could not find a way to accept it. The Wild Bunch was the last of something, the last men who could ride out of reach, the last outlaws who still had somewhere to run. And when the frontier finally caught up with them, when even South America wasn't far enough, when the Pinkertons crossed 2 oceans, they didn't surrender, they just disappeared. And Red Dead Redemption 2 understood that completely. Every campfire speech Dutch gives, every moment Arthur Morgan questions what any of it was for. Every scene where you feel the walls closing in around people who deserve, maybe, something better than what they're going to get. That's not invented drama. That's historically grounded grief. The grief of people living through the death of a world. A world full of violence and injustice, yes, but also a world of genuine freedom, terrifying openness, and the strange, lonely dignity of people who refused to be absorbed. Rockstar didn't just make a game, they built a time machine. And every time you rode out across those plains, you were riding through actual American history.
If this video hit different knowing all of this, please share it.
With someone who loves this game, or honestly, with someone who has never played it, because this is just wild American history regardless of the game. And if you want to go even deeper, the next episode is the Pinkerton Detective Agency, the real organization. And I promise you, the real Pinkertons are so much more sinister, so much more interesting, and so much more relevant to right now than 2 men in suits showing up at a camp. Click that next video. You are not going to regret it. See you in the next one.